Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. There we go. Starting to see the attendees filing in. There we go. Excellent. Hey, welcome everybody to another edition of the Virtuous Insider. This is our hour-long deep dive edition where we're going to cover some training topics in a little bit more depth. Really nice. We have a full hour to let this breathe a little bit and dive in on it. Still seeing folks coming in, seeing that attendee list go up and up. So I'll let everybody get situated here. While you do, we're going to lay out a few ground rules here, a few basics. Some of you have been around the Insider for a while. You'll recognize all this stuff. But we are recording today's session. We do record all of the Insider sessions. And we will make the recording available in the support section after. So if you do want to get a copy of the recording, if you want to share it with colleagues, if you want to just watch it when you're, have some downtime late at night, you can go ahead and do that. Everybody is muted. That way we get some good audio. Hopefully you can hear us loud and clear. You can see from behind me, we're in a little bit of a different space this week. So hopefully that is still coming through loud and clear. And if you have a question, please go ahead and send it in. We want to answer your questions. We'll probably have some chat going on the side, but if you have a question, please do go ahead and send that in through the Q&A box. You'll see the button for that in the control panel. That way we can make sure we don't miss your question when it comes time to tackle those. And I say we, not meaning the royal we necessarily. Instead, I'm talking about me and my co-host, Rachel, is here. Rachel from the train team, who also just did jazz hands. Very good. That is the right way to greet everybody. Excellent. So Rachel will be here in the chat, certainly chatting it up with folks. Keeping an eye out for your questions as they come in. So again, if you have a question, send it in through that Q&A. That would be great. And if you just want to say hi or something like that, or Rachel, I like your glasses, cool, you can drop that into the chat. We're pretty personable people as well. Now, in terms of our agenda for today, we've got a lot of stuff to cover here. We're going to talk about projects, and we're going to start with the basics. You've always got to start with the basics, right? So what's a project? What are they for? What's the purpose? What do they do? We'll talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to talk about the different fields that are available on projects. What do they do? What do they control? What's the use for a lot of those things? And then we're going to dive into the structure. When we talk about structural elements for projects, the first thing that comes to mind all the time is the idea of parent projects and subprojects. We'll talk about that. But you've also got the option to use what we call types and locations. And those are other ways that you can create some structure around your projects for reporting, right? And I know that projects are different for every organization. We have some clients that have 3 or 4 active projects. We have clients that have 7,000 or 8,000 active projects, right? For everybody, how they use projects is going to be a little bit different. We'll take a look at that. And then, of course, if you've got questions, send them in. I mean, geez, I hope we've got answers. So go ahead and let us know. That's what we're here to do. And then that'll be time to wrap it up for another month for this training edition of the Insider. Okay, so all that said, let's go ahead and dive in, talk about projects, project structure, all the things that are project related. And it's great. I see stuff coming in through chat. I see stuff coming into Q&A. Keep it going. Again, we're happy to keep that side conversation going.
I think this first question is actually, I think it's good to maybe distinguish between projects, campaigns, and grants right off the bat here. What do you think, Scott?
I think it's kind of like someone knew what was coming first in the agenda, and they wanted to tee us up, which is excellent. So I think that was Ann who sent that in. Thank you, Ann. That is an awesome way to kick us off. We're going to switch over here into Virtuous proper. So I want to dive into projects. But like we said, we're talking about the use of projects. What's the nature of projects? So projects work together with campaigns. I know we've done another one of these deep dive insider sessions on campaigns earlier this year. But projects work together with campaigns to form something that I always call the giving infrastructure in Virtuous. Right? That's really sitting there underneath supporting all of the giving data that you have. Now, campaigns have their own structure to them. Again, we've got a lot of materials and things to talk about campaigns. So here when we say campaigns, we're just talking in the big picture term, the campaign structure. Campaigns are designed to help you keep track of how you raised any of the money coming into your organization in the first place. How did you ask? What was the message? What was the channel that you used to send that message? Who was the audience that received that message? All of those things, all of that is covered by the campaign structure. That's the origin of all of your gifts. Projects, they're going to be the destination for all of those gifts. Where's that money going? What is it for? What is its purpose? What program are we going to fund? Is this gift restricted to a specific purpose or project? That's the intent of your projects. Okay, I know the question also went on to mention grants. Grants themselves, right, when I'm asking for grant funding or grant money, that's an avenue in which to receive money. When those grant payments come in, I'll attribute them to a campaign segment to know this is grant income. And I can also attribute that to a specific project. Typically, if I'm applying for a grant, I'm asking for support for a specific project that I want to fund. So at a very basic level now, you've got this idea of campaigns and projects. Campaigns are the origin. Projects are the destination for all of that money. If you want to remember this, the easiest way to do it, you just want to think of the Cotton Eye Joe rule. If you haven't been to a Yankees game, you don't know Cotton Eye Joe, you just want to think, when you have a gift, am I thinking about where did it come from? Am I thinking about where did it go? Where did it come from, Cotton Eye Joe? That's the name of the rule, okay? So the Cotton Eye Joe rule, that'll tell you all the time, is this something that belongs on the campaign side or on the project side? And I should say, you really do want a clear delineation between these two. I want clear reporting on this. I can't tell you how many times I've looked at a fund structure or projects or something in a database, and I'll see things there like golf tournament, right? Or individual giving, right? And golf tournament, that tells me how I raised the money. Individual giving, that tells me who gave that money. I've got other ways to track that in Virtuous. The golf tournament, that's going to be part of my campaign structure. And who gave me the money? Well, that's the contact type for each of those gifts. But if I've got money sitting in those two different buckets, it's very hard for me to know how much money is in my general operating budget right now. Or how much money do I have in my kids' literacy program budget right now? Because I need to know that part of it is sitting in these other areas, these other buckets. Makes it really hard to classify that stuff. So the cleaner that I can keep it, the easier it is for me to get a clear picture of my finances. So all that said, now we want to dive in a little bit more on projects. And so if we come over here into Virtuous Projects, that's the little bookmark, little ribbon over here, right? That takes me to our projects page. Now I've got a bunch of fake projects here in my sandbox, but to walk through some of the fields on here, we're just going to go ahead and create a new project. We're going to do it together. There's a bunch of fields on here. Now, only 2 of these are required. Everything else is just here as an elaborate practical joke. No, everything else here is gravy. It's extra. It gives you some more options, some more detail, but only 2 things are absolutely vital if you want to create a project. The first, each project must have a name. Okay, so we're going to call this project webinar. Great. And then every project must have a code. So web 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Great. As long as I've got that, I've got a project. Now, anywhere in Virtuous that you see this structure, when we talk about segments, we talk about premiums, we talk about media outlets, this comes up a lot. You've got this idea of a name and a code. It's always the same thing. The name does not have to be unique, but the code does. Every single project in your database could have the exact same name. Totally fine. System has no problem with it. It's going to confuse the living daylights out of everybody that works at your organization, but Virtuous is cool with that as a software platform. The code, that's the unique identifier. That project code can only exist on one project in your entire database. That's it. And the reason that we let you set that project code as opposed to just assigning a code is because that code should have meaning outside of Virtuous. Not only should this be the unique identifier for this project inside of Virtuous, this should be the unique accounting code that you're using in your accounting platform. Whether that is an account code, or if it's, there's all sorts of other things that could be a class, it could be a GL code, all these different things. Every system has a slightly different way of tracking that data. But at the end of the day, it means the same thing. It's the unique identifier for this particular bucket of cash. How much goes in? Now, once I've got these two set, again, I can create my project, but this would be a short webinar if we didn't go through the rest of these things. So external accounting code, you have the external accounting code. That's, exactly what it says on the label, right? It's an additional accounting code for external use. Virtuous CRM, Virtuous the system, doesn't care what value goes in here. Okay? That's only for use with your accounting system. So when I import gift data to my accounting platform, and that is the direction your data should be flowing. Gifts should be coming into Virtuous. I enter the data there, then I'm going to export data from Virtuous, and it goes into my accounting system. When you do that, maybe you need two different codes. Some systems need a GL code and a cost center code, right? It needs an account code and a class code. It needs who knows what. Great. External accounting code gives you a space to store that additional code value. Okay? But the external accounting code, because it isn't something being used in Virtuous proper, the external accounting code isn't restricted. You could have the same external accounting code on 10 different projects, and that's fine. Okay? Project code can only exist on one project. Now, we don't have a lot of other rules about project code. It can still include letters and numbers and spaces and all kinds of punctuation, pretty much anything but a pipe. But external accounting code, that could be shared among multiple. And often it is. Now, the online display name, that lets you create a public-facing alias for your project. That way, if you want to have an internal name that you use among your staff, and then you want to have a different, a nicer sort of public-facing name for this project, you can. That online display name will be used if this project is made available on Virtuous giving forms. It'll be used to print on receipts or put in email receipts when you send someone a receipt for their gift. That's also used by some of our integration partners. So if you're using raised donors for online giving, that online display name will be used there too. When you use the project sync between the two platforms. So again, the idea is that anywhere someone publicly interacts with this project, they would see that online display name. The description, this is just a big old text box. You can put in whatever you want in here. For some of our clients, this might be where they're going to put their case for support for this project. If you've got one or two really nicely polished paragraphs that talk about why the kids literacy program is vital, this is a great place to store that. And then when you're sending out an appeal and you're asking for people to support the kids literacy program, you can come in here, you can grab that copy, you can drop it into your email or your letter or whatever it is that you're sending. Now, types, status, locations, we're going to talk a little bit more about those when we talk about structure in just a little bit. So that's what we professionally call a little bit of a teaser. And we'll come back to that later on. And then you've got your duration type. Duration type could be ongoing, and for a lot of projects it is, right? Your programming, by and large, probably isn't changing very much from year to year, right? Your programs that you offer them year round. So it makes sense that your projects would be ongoing. It's just keeping the lights on. It's keeping up, feeding the hungry. That's what we do. Now, if you wanted to run a pilot program and test out a new method of doing some job placement training for folks that you work with, then you could create a fixed duration project. And that fixed duration project has to have a start date and an end date. That's what fixed duration means. It's got a start, it's got an end. Okay? Otherwise, it's ongoing. And then you can set the financial need. So what's the goal? What do you need to raise for this particular program? Now that could be fixed or that could be ongoing as well. So if you have a fixed duration project, you're probably going to have a fixed need amount. Hey, for this project to be able to run, we need to raise $35,000. Now, if you have an ongoing project. And you can also express this as an ongoing need, and that might be how much you have to raise annually, or could be monthly, could be quarterly, what you need to raise for that particular project. Now, when you set this need amount, that's going to be visible in the header when you view your project. But it's also going to be used on your Virtuous dashboard when you set up your dashboard widgets. There is a widget called the Project Goal Overview widget, and that'll keep track of your progress to your goal. It'll express that differently depending on the type of goal you've set. If you have a fixed goal, it's going to show you your progress to that number. That's it. If I set this up as a monthly goal, then it's going to show me my progress month to date against that number, right? Or if it's quarterly, maybe it's annual, it's going to show me year to date, how much have I raised against that goal. And if you've got multiple projects that you're involved with, remember, you can have multiple copies of that same widget on your dashboard so you can keep track of your progress on each of those projects. Now, the project configuration section, this is a whole mess of checkboxes and doodads in here. And the tricky thing with this is that not all of these settings apply universally to everyone. Some of them are used with different third-party integrations that work with Virtuous, and some of them are used directly in Virtuous. So your needs for any of these are going to vary depending on the mix of systems that you're using. But to take a quick look at a few of these here, the one that applies to everybody, it's just global across the board, is this is active. By the way, that's the best I can draw with my touchpad. I apologize. But is active. That one applies to everybody because if a project's not active, you can't designate any money to it. It is closed for business. Okay? And if you were to go into the gift and contact import tool and you search for an inactive project, it's not even going to show up. Functionally, it's like it doesn't exist. If you had a gift come in through, let's say, a CSV import, maybe an integration through the API, then it's going to show you an error in the import tool, say, hey, you can't put money here because that project is closed. So if you had a fixed duration project and then you shut it down, you might do that. If you've got folks who are raising their own support, they're typically expressed or tracked as projects in Virtuous to know how much they've raised. If any of them were to say leave the field, then you'd make that project inactive. Right? There's a lot of cases where you might do that. Now, is available online and is public. These two here. They're not going to do anything particular in Virtuous CRM, but they are used with some of our integrations, including with our very own, with Virtuous Giving. If I want this project to be available in a Virtuous Giving form, not only does it have to be active, it also has to be available online, and it has to be public. So this whole top row, all three of them, they have to be checked off. Okay. These is available online, is public. These are also used in the project sync that we have with raised donors to determine, again, if projects are available to be added on donation pages, and even to set whether that project is available, if it's anonymous, if it's hidden. There's a lot of different settings that you'll see for projects. In raised donors, they would be funds on that side, but you'll see that there. Okay, so neither of these is really going to be used in Virtuous CRM, but they are going to be used in Virtuous Giving. They'll be used in raised donors. See them in a couple places. Now, the not tax deductible, oh boy, this is even hard to read here. We're going to stop with that crazy scribble. But this one here, not tax deductible. This one's an interesting one. Okay, so any gift that you put into Virtuous, by default, the baseline is it's a tax deductible donation. Because we're software for nonprofits. That's what we do. So that's the assumption. But you could make part of a gift or an entire gift non-deductible. A couple ways you can do that, right? A, you could apply a premium. It's going to reduce the fair market value or reduce the tax deductible amount based on the fair market value of that premium. B, you could designate a gift or just part of a gift to a non-deductible project. That'll reduce the tax deductible amount of that gift, potentially all the way to zero. So we have some clients, some organizations that offer fee-for-service programs as part of how they bring in their revenue. Right? Maybe I've got an after-school program that works with kids, And as part of bringing my revenue, I also offer paid tutoring services. Well, those paid tutoring services, if someone's paying for that, it's not a donation, but I want to keep track of that revenue and that income. Well, to keep track of that, I could have a non-deductible project to keep track of that revenue. That way, I'm not issuing receipts for it. I'm not showing it as tax deductible when I generate my year-end statements at the end of the year, but I can still see that income reflected in Virtuous. Now, the third option for making part of a gift or a whole gift non-deductible, you know, when you create or edit a gift, there's a checkbox to say it's not tax deductible. That's kind of a sledgehammer. There's no detail behind why it's non-deductible. It's not because of the project. It's not because of a premium. It's mostly just because I said so. You didn't know I was a parent. Now you do because I said so. And that's it, right? So not really ideal in a lot of scenarios. You have all three of them. Now, stop accepting when full. Treat as accounts payable. These do not have a direct function in Virtuous CRM at all. Kind of like the checkboxes above. These are used specifically in integration. Specifically, there's an integration that we have with an organization that does online processing called Giving Fuel. And the integration there takes advantage of these additional features in terms of being able to show certain projects as designation options on giving forms. Now, the enable syncing via webhooks, you know, in one sense, if you're not sure what webhooks are, that setting may not apply to you. But webhooks are used for syncing data across different software platforms. So if you are using Raise Donors and you are syncing project data to Raise Donors, that sync is being powered by webhooks. Now you could disable webhooks here for just this one project as a way to disable that sync. Okay? Now again, I can also disable the sync in a couple of other ways, but this would let me do that for just this one project and say, hey, I don't want any other system or program to know anything about this project. This one is only for me here in Virtuous. And finally, the ability to set a default project. Well, guess what? Everybody's got a default project. It's right out of the box. It's called default project. We don't really hide it. And Virtuous as a system simply requires that you have a default. If you wanted to change it, you could make this project your default. Now, by and large, that's not going to do a heck of a lot functionally in Virtuous. It is a requirement for some of our integrations, for example, with QuickBooks. I have to have a default project set, even if I'm just exporting an IIF file for QuickBooks Desktop. Okay? But again, you'll have a default set already. That's there out of the box for everybody. All right, let's get rid of some of these scribbles here. There we go. Now, as we move down here, you can see we've got some custom fields set up in here, so you can define custom fields at the project level as well. Totally fine. And then I can see those here when I create a project or when I edit a project, same way I would anything else. And then the gift specifications. Now, this sounds very serious. It says it's going to restrict gifts to valid amounts. And you might come in here and say, okay, well, a valid amount is going to be $45 monthly. I'm going to add that in here. Now, whether you set that or not, that is not going to stop you from designating a $100 one-time gift to this project, right? Whether it's checked or unchecked to restrict gifts. This is not going to do anything to you in Virtuous CRM at all. As a matter of fact, this section here, these features are actually used by a giving integration. That same partner we mentioned earlier, Giving Fuel, that integration leverages this functionality for their giving forms. Now, the project owner, this one's interesting. So you can come in here and you can set a project owner. You even define multiple project owners. You're certainly welcome to have more than one. Okay? And setting someone, excuse me, setting someone as the owner by itself doesn't do a lot. It's going to list their name on the project and tell everybody, hey, they're the owner of the project. Super cool. But you can combine this with user permissions. And I can restrict users' access and say that they're only allowed to see projects. And even more, that they're only allowed to see gift data for projects where they are an owner. This is used in a lot of cases for deputized fundraising. So if Rachel, who's sitting right across from me here, Rachel is raising her own support, right? I could set Rachel up as the owner of her own project. Then when I give Rachel access to Virtuous, I'll restrict her so that she only sees the giving to her project. She doesn't see any other financial data. That way, I know that she's staying focused on her support and only her support. Now, the associated projects, this functionality down here, this is also very often used together in those deputized fundraising sort of environments, where you can associate this with, let's say I'm going to associate it with the general fund, and I can set an allocation percentage. Maybe it's going to be 1.9%. And then that says, hey, any giving to this project, I want to allocate 1.9% of each gift to the general fund. It's going back to cover general operating expenses. Now, the crucial thing is this is not going to move any money around in Virtuous. Because what you want to remember is even though this project structure exists to help you track your financial data and is the connection, this is the connective tissue between Virtuous and your accounting system. That's, again, why we have you define that project code and use the unique identifier for this account in your accounting system. But even though this is the connection to your accounting system, Virtuous is not accounting software. And there is no such thing as a journal entry in Virtuous. I can't move money from one project to another. Okay? Virtuous is always, always, always going to reflect the donor's experience. If the donor gave $100 to this project, we always want that gift to show $100 to this project. The only way to adjust the amount of money given to a project would be to edit the gifts themselves. We're not going to do that. So this allocation percentage and these associated projects, what this allows you to do is actually pull a report. There's a report on the dashboard that'll let you pull the allocation amounts. So that way I could import that to my accounting system if I want to be able to see that there. Now, you may already have allocations set up in your accounting system, rules and things like that, which means there isn't so much of a need for this association here unless you simply want to make sure that it's represented in Virtuous for anybody who's interacting with the data in Virtuous, because I'm sure there are many more people who have access to Virtuous than there are folks who have access to your accounting system. Okay. So now we're going to go ahead and save this little project that we've created. So here's our project webinar project. Welcome to the Department of Redundancy Department. But this project webinar project here, we've set it up. We've got our name. We've got our project code, everything that we set. All those little check boxes that we took some time talking through, they're all right on here. That's great. Now we know everything about our project. So now we come to the part where we start to talk a little bit about structure, because certainly you could just do this. You could create a handful of projects. You could toss them into Virtuous. If someone gives a gift, they might want to designate it to one project or another. And we all know you can also split a gift among multiple projects, and that's fine. And if you have a small number of projects, that might be just right for your organization. Move my chair here. But you also have the ability to create some structure among your projects in Virtuous that you can use for reporting purposes, and especially for the organizations that have a lot of projects. Right? If you're really project heavy, project reliant, whatever kind of terminology you want to use, then the project structure becomes a lot more important. And when we talk about project structure, the first thing we think of always is this idea of a parent project and a sub-project or multiple sub-projects. Now, if I wanted to turn our project webinar project into a parent project, that's a lot of saying project. If I wanted to do that, I don't have to do anything fancy or special to the project itself. All I need to do is come in and give it a sub-project, at least one. And then that turns this into a parent project. And I can do that on the Subprojects tab right here. There's a big blue button to go ahead and add a sub-project. And this is pretty familiar because we just walked through all of these fields. It's the same thing we saw when we created our project. One big difference is it does ask you, hey, what should be the parent project? It's assuming it's the one we're on. Maybe I'm in the wrong place. Now I could change my mind before I create this project. But maybe here this is going to be our webinar room. We set up a room to all do our fancy webinar. And so this one's going to be room 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm very creative with my project codes today. Everything else is the same, right? I can set up a duration type. I can set up a fixed or ongoing need, right? Everything that we saw before. Go ahead and save that. And now I've got my sub-project. Here's webinar room. Looks almost the same as what we created before. And that's because functionally, it really is, right? Webinar room, project webinar, these are two separate projects in many respects. And a donor could give a gift and designate that gift to project webinar, to parent project, or to the webinar room, to the sub-project, either way. Okay? And so each of them is going to track its own totals. So here on this project, you can see in the header, it shows us how much we've raised this year. Not doing so hot, but it's kind of new, so give us some time. But this particular project's raised $0. If someone came in and said, hey, I want to give you $7,000 to set up your new webinar, great. We'll enter that gift, and then we would see this update here, which shows us that we've raised $7,000 this year. That will not carry through to project webinar when I view the project webinar page. I won't see that $7,000 here. Each project is going to show me how much has been designated to it specifically. Okay, they're each, again, tracking their own totals. When I'm on the project page, I'm not going to see what's been given to sub-projects and other things. I'm just seeing what went to this project. And again, a donor could designate their gift to the parent, or they could designate their gift to the sub-project. Either way. Now, if these are both separate, what's the point of parent project, sub-project? So glad that you hypothetically asked that question, because I'm going to answer it anyway. Let's go to our dashboard here. So the idea here is that it allows me to group some of this data together for reporting purposes. That's the idea. So if I were to go to my dashboard, now there's a lot of ways to report on projects, but built right in here, we go to reports. You're going to see here we've got our project summary report. And that gives me exactly what it says on the label, a summary of giving to a particular project, group of projects, what have you. And to run this report, I can come in here and you'll see, first off, it does say if I leave this empty, it's going to report on all my projects. But I can come in and pick and choose. I can grab a few different projects here, whatever's going on in Albany, New York, I don't know. Great. But I could also come in and I could report on my education project. Here it is, ED 1234. Now, for the purposes of this, I'm going to run this back a little ways because I know my sandbox data is all over the map. Let's look at this going back to the beginning of 2017. Now, again, it defaults to about a 30-day time frame. You can report on 30 days, this year, whatever range you want to specify. And when I run this report, this is going to show me, here's the giving, all told, over that time frame. Here's the expenses, too. We'll talk about expenses in a minute. But then down here, it's going to show me how much has been given to the education, the parent project, and then how much has been given to each sub-project, the adults sub-project and the children's education sub-project. And it'll show me the total gifts, the total giving for each. And then at the bottom, it gives me my big number, my grand total. How much has been given to everything in this education hierarchy, this education vertical over this particular time frame. Now, how you use parent projects and sub-projects is going to vary from organization to organization. For smaller organizations, there are a lot of folks who have just two parent projects, unrestricted giving and restricted giving. Unrestricted is just that, it's their general operating, that's it. Restricted giving may have sub-projects under that for each of the different restrictions, which might apply to major gifts, maybe it only applies to some grant funds, right? You might only have a handful of those restrictions there. And in some cases, folks are still, those are one-to-one. Each parent project, sub-project has a corresponding account in the accounting system. In other cases, there are folks who only track those parent projects in the accounting system. They only want this big number, this big roll-up to go into accounting, because that's the only thing that accounting is concerned with. Right? And in Virtuous, they may be tracking more granular data. That does make sense, right? Because tracking that data in Virtuous means I can get more detail on what my donors are interested in, what makes them tick, what are they passionate about, what types of programs do they tend to support. It's really the value add there. Okay. Now, when I go to run this report, you may have noticed, those of you who are eagle-eyed viewers may have caught, that I have the ability not only to report on a specific project or to grab a group of projects based on the parent, but I also had two other options. I could report on projects based on their type or based on their location. Okay? And types and locations, these are two values that you get to configure. You can control these in your project settings. Okay? If you go into customization, in the settings menu, in your project settings, you can add values to the list of types. You can add values to the list for locations. Totally fine. And then you can use these as additional ways to group your projects together. Types, intentionally pretty broad, could be anything. And locations is the same thing. For some of our clients, locations are countries. For some, it's departments. It's all over the map. So if you want to think about how these work together in terms of your data, here, let's come on back over with me to our slides for a second. So if you think about this idea of parent projects and subprojects, this hierarchical idea, this hierarchical structure, okay? So here we've got a couple of parent projects, parent project 1, 2, and 3. And each of them has a handful of subprojects. They've got 4 subprojects underneath of it. So this might be the way that I've set up my project structure. Then by having my project structured this way, if I want to go in and I want to easily get my hands on or report on all of the projects under that parent project 1 hierarchy, I can go ahead and do that. I can grab all of those projects in that vertical and I can report on them together. And then I could use types as a way to go in and grab an entirely different grouping of projects. It might be a cross-section. Okay, a subproject does not have to share a type with its parent at all. In fact, the intent is that they won't. So that way I can grab a different, horizontal slice here of all of these projects, and then maybe locations. They're all over the place, but I want to grab a whole other group of projects, get my hands on them, and report on them. And especially if your organization has a large number of projects, this is going to make it a lot easier to go ahead and do your reporting without having to constantly create a pick list of all of the projects that you want to include. If you're just getting started with setting up your project structure, start to look at the ways that you tend to report on project data, the ways that you tend to have to group them together for reporting, right? And start to think about how to do this. Now, you've got these different options, different tools in your tool belt. You've got the parent project, subproject idea. You've got types. You've got locations. So all of these give you different ways to group projects. Now, of them, types and locations, those are easy to change. Again, you're going to configure the list of your types. You're going to configure the list of your locations and everything else. And then that means that in Virtuous, if you want to go into your project and you want to edit a project at any point, you can come in and you can say, okay, now I'm going to change the location. This is going to be in the Pacific region. Great. Easy peasy. You want to change those values, you can go into settings, you can change those values in that list, and you can change what's on your projects. That's totally fine. Oh, for crying out loud, go away, my little dog. There we go. Now, parent project, subproject, that's not so easy to change, okay? Because I can't go in, so I can't come in here to my webinar room subproject, and I cannot easily move it to a new parent. Okay? We saw the ability to select the parent project when we created it, but I can't go in and toggle that now. It's not impossible to change, but it's a very manual process. I'd have to go to the parent project where I want this to live and create the new subproject there. Remember, I can't use the same code either. I have to change one of the project codes. Then I'd have to go grab all the gifts, all of the pledges, all of the recurring gifts designated to the original webinar room subproject, and I'd have to update them to designate them to the new subproject in its new location, right? So if you think about this, hey, I got a safe and it's in the office in my house and I want to put in a new safe in the bedroom instead. Okay. First, I'm going to install the new safe up in the bedroom. Then I got to make sure I take all the money and documents out of the safe in the office and put them in the new one in the bedroom before I throw out that old safe. Same thing. Get all the gifts, all the pledges, all the recurring gifts, designate them to the new parent, the new subproject, excuse me. Then you can delete the original subproject. So again, not impossible, but a lot of steps. So when you're thinking about these tools, these options, parent project, subproject really wants to be something that is bedrock to your organization, something about your structure that has existed for years and years, something that's core to your mission and that's not going to change overnight, something that's not just a new strategy that you're trying. Right? That's something that types and locations are going to be ideal for, because again, types and locations, they're fungible. I can change them at any point. Okay, I've been seeing some questions come in. I've been seeing some stuff coming in through the chat. I want to make sure we have time to get to those. We've got about 15 minutes here. So Rachel, I know you've been keeping an eagle eye on everything that's coming through. What sort of questions do we have coming in?
All right, so some of these are going to kind of reflect what we went over at the beginning of the seminar. Is project code same as accounting fund ID?
It could be. And that's because accounting fund ID, again, every accounting system has a different nomenclature, right? It could be account ID, it could be GL code, it could be the class code, it could be any number of things. So that's why I say, really, in terms of something universal, whatever is the unique identifier for this fund or account in your accounting system, that's what I want that project code to be. Whatever's the unique identifier, so it's the same in both.
We had another question. So I know we talked a little bit about virtuous giving and how that kind of works in the project structure here. When we say virtuous giving, do we mean we pay?
We could, right? So virtuous giving would just be anyone who is creating giving forms through Virtuous, right? You might be processing on WePay. You might be processing gifts through Stripe, right? We've got a couple of different processors. But if you're creating giving forms in Virtuous and embedding those on your website, if you're managing those transactions from Virtuous Marketing, right? That's what we mean when we say virtuous giving.
That's all we've got in the regular Q&A, but I did find some questions popping up in the chat. Can I assign an existing project as a subproject?
So excellent question, but no, the same way I can't move a subproject, say, from one to the other, right? I can't take a parent project and say, now I want it to be a subproject. Those structural changes are not something that I can easily do. It's not impossible, but it means I have to do a little bit more work. I've got to create the new subproject. I've got to update all the gift data, and then I can get rid of the old.
So just to clarify, it seems like people didn't really hear me on that one. Can we hear me now?
Oh man, that's terrible.
As I just got closer to the screen to pull the microphone towards me.
There we go.
Better, okay.
Sounds like we're better. Thank you everybody for answering.
I like to think that I speak loudly, but I guess not loudly enough for the mic to pick up. So the question that I had taken from the chat was, can I assign an existing project as a subproject? So that was the answer Scott just gave to us.
I like that. We're playing Jeopardy. I gave everybody the answer, and then you supplied the question. That's awesome.
Right. Where can I update my already created project type?
Excellent. So again, in your settings, now I'm going to try to build it. Rachel slyly pushing the microphone back towards me. This is excellent here. When I go into my project settings, so here, let's get out of this little, oh, for crying out loud. Anytime I go near the bottom of the screen, it wants to move the dock over. There we go. Sorry, I'm trying to move all the little Zoom things that move around on my screen. Apologies, everybody. Didn't think I'd do this professionally. But if I come in here to my settings, I need to go to all settings. Okay. And then I can go into data customization. And in data customization, what I'm looking for here is my project settings. Project settings is where I can configure the values that I'm using for inventory statuses. Now, inventory statuses, those are kind of specific. Okay, that's really something that's used mostly for project sponsorship organizations, things like that, to know which kids have been sponsored and which haven't. But I can also change the values for my project types. I can change the values for my project location. So I could add or delete. The key is if I'm going to get rid of some values here, what I want to do first is add whatever the replacement value is. Go edit my projects, then delete the old value once it's not on any other projects.
One more question going on here. Can you run reports using project code?
Yes. Yes, you can. That's the short answer. We could do a longer answer too. That's fine. And here's the key, actually. So I'm really glad. It looks like that's from Anonymous. So whoever you are, Anonymous, thank you. Because like we said, project code is the unique identifier for your projects within Virtuous and within whatever other system. Okay. But since project code is unique and name is not, I tell people all the time, if I'm going in and I'm querying for gifts, let's say I'm doing a gift query, for example, I can go in and I can query for all the gifts, and I can ask for, I can go ahead and look for projects. Remember, we'll just type in the word project so you can see all the values here. And I could do this based on project name, and I see this a lot. But again, the name is not unique. Now, it might be unique for you, right? But Virtuous is not enforcing that. So it's entirely possible that someone somewhere could have created a project with the same name. If you have a large number of projects, those odds probably go up. It's hard to eyeball. If I only have 7 projects, it's really easy to keep close tabs on all 7. If I've got 7,000, there's some projects there that I don't see all that often. Okay? So always, always use your project code. That's going to be the unique identifier. That's what I want to use to build into my queries. I can use that for queries that are powering custom reports. I can use that everywhere. Now, in the dashboard report we were doing earlier, we were selecting project from our list based on the name, but they also had their project code in parentheses. So I could use the code to search for the project there, the same way I do project name. Push this back across the table.
All right, thanks, Scott. So everyone's been asking really awesome questions, so definitely keep them coming in. We have another one, and this one's a specific audience. So when transitioning to Virtuous from another database, what are good questions to ask coworkers who deal with gift entry and dollar reporting in order to understand the current setup and set up Virtuous projects appropriately?
Oh, sorry, leaning out of frame, taking the mic back. This is good. I like this question. So this is part of, the bigger piece here is really change management for your organization. Hey, we're going to be moving to Virtuous. We need to make sure that for every team, I'm meeting with those teams, especially if you're leading the charge for moving to Virtuous. It's a big change for your organization. So I want to meet with all of my different teams and get to understand their core processes. What are the things that they do day in, day out? Because you probably don't know all of those things. And so sitting down with those teams, right, and asking them, again, for the gift entry folks, gift entry is going to be gift entry. Whether a project is a parent project, a sub-project, has a type, none of that changes my process for gift entry. So that part's easy. But on the reporting side of things, hey, how are we running reports on finances today? How are we exporting data to import to our accounting system? What does it look like when you do that, right? What does the chart of accounts look like in the accounting system if you don't know? Trying to get your head around some of those things, that's what's going to help inform that project structure. And the other side of that too is don't forget, you don't have to invent all of it yourself. The key is if you can understand the needs of your team, you can understand what folks are doing and things like that, then when you sit down with our migration team or with your coach for onboarding, you can let them know, hey, here are the needs from my team. Here's what people have said they're doing. How can we make that happen in Virtuous? And it might be a change, right? We don't want to recreate the same process. We want to figure out how we can achieve the same end result. So the other thing to focus in on is not, hey, what do you do? The question, and when I've worked with clients who are transitioning to Virtuous, the number one question I ask is why, right? Don't tell me that this is how you run this report. Why are you running this report? Because again, I don't want to recreate your process. I mean, why change systems if you're going to do all the same exact things? What I want to do is I want to make sure that you can achieve the same end result. That's the thing to really zero in on with your coworkers when you're trying to understand their needs.
It looks like we have one question. Our accounting department uses revenue source codes on all gifts. A custom field has been recommended. Do you have any other suggestions?
So this is a tough one to answer in a vacuum and kind of in a general sense, right? Because when I hear source code, again, as we talked about at the beginning, the source of all my gifts, the origin of my gifts, where they're coming from, that should always be something that triggers campaign, right? Specifically, those codes in Virtuous would be my segment codes. That's what tells me how I raised the money, right? And again, that's really the purview of my fundraising team, my marketing team. That's who's being measured on how effective all of their strategies are in terms of bringing in revenue, right? For my accounting team, my projects, right? That's really the destination of that money. That's a specific fund or account, a specific program that I'm raising money for. Right? So again, in terms of origin and destination. So when I hear source code, I immediately, in my head, I translate to segment. Now, it might be that there's something else going on. I don't know if there's something specific that's kind of driving you down that custom field path. But I will say, I'm always very reticent to use custom fields for what I would consider critical business processes, especially if there's already space in Virtuous for that data to exist, right? Because then I'm going to be in a lot better shape. I'm going to have a lot more tools built in. I'm going to have a lot more reporting built in around it than I do on the custom field that I've defined. Okay. Now, anything more than that, I would say for really diving into the specifics, certainly talk to your onboarding coach. Certainly talk to your migration consultant to get to understand a little bit more about the specific recommendations. And I know we're short on time. We have a couple of other questions coming in. Rachel, if you don't mind, I saw someone ask again about the why. And I was just going to dive in on that without having to push the mic over to you again. Spared no expense. But in terms of the why, right? Again, this is really the biggest thing when it comes to change management across the board is I don't want to recreate the exact same process that someone is doing today, but just in Virtuous. I want to help them achieve the same end result. I'll tell you guys a quick story that kind of highlights this in a good way, and then I know we're pretty close on time here. So we had a client. I don't know if they're on this call or not. If you are, guys, sorry, I don't know. But we had a client who was coming to Virtuous, and they had talked to a lot of folks here on the team, and there was this big struggle to recreate an existing report that they had in their legacy system. Okay, and we had a couple people come in and try to look at it and figure out how to do it, and it ended up coming to me saying, hey, what can we do? And I looked at the report, and it was a Frankenstein of a report because it had gift data from individual transactions. It had giving statistics on it. It had marketing roll-up data on it. It had email. I mean, just everything under the sun in things that really don't relate to one another. but put into this big giant table. And so the problem was, hey, all of this data existed in Virtuous in different places, but we couldn't combine it into a single query or export to get it into one unified report. And so when I looked at it, I finally said, guys, why is all of this data in this report? It really seems like there are a lot of different use cases here. And what we ultimately found out is that this was the master report used by every department in their organization. And this client had to pay to have this report built. So they paid to build one report, and it got sent out to the whole company on a daily basis, and each department only used certain parts of the report. So the marketing team had their 4 fields that they used, the finance team had their fields they used, the fundraising team had their section, and that's it. So what we were doing is we were trying to recreate their process. One report, a whole bunch of data, may or may not be related. When really, when we got into the why, we said, look, what if we broke this up? If the fundraising team only needs this data, then why are we trying to pull all this other data into their report? They can get this data from a built-in saved query, or they can even use these dashboard widgets and they can get that data themselves or have access to that data. The finance team can get their data, and we don't have to build it into a single combined report. So that was a case of really driving into the why as opposed to the how to make sure that we got someone what they needed, right? Processes are going to change. The steps you go through are going to change when you change systems. That's why it's change management. It's a big deal, right? But if I focus in on the why, then that's really going to help me identify the best solutions. Okay, I know we're right at time here, so thank you guys. This has been great. I love when we have some good questions coming in. I'm glad we stopped early enough to be able to tackle some of these questions here. And hey, look, I even had a slide 4 questions, but we just did all that, so let's skip right through that. Why not? I do want to say, as always, please do join us. We do this every Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern. Right? Same bat time, same bat channel. We'll be looking at some key responsive strategies next week, how you can implement some of those when you're working in Virtuous. And as always, I like to leave you with some words from someone who is smarter than me. And this time, why not go with the Archbishop of Canterbury when you can, right? The longer I go on, the more I am aware of the power of finance. The reason I chose this is because I feel like a lot of people get into nonprofit work, right? Because we're mission-driven people. We want to make a difference. We believe in the mission. And over time, you suddenly start to realize that finance has a lot of power over what happens in the organization. I feel like this is the path a lot of people go down, right? Here, we've been looking at all the different ways that you can connect data to finance. It's not great if finance is making all of the decisions for your fundraising department, right? But hey, finance is a crucial part. Fundraising and finance both start with F. They got to work together really, really well, right? To make sure that we're tracking what we're doing, to make sure we've got a really good financial picture of what we've done and what we still need to raise, right? They need to work very well together, but it shouldn't be one of them's driving the bus over the other. It really wants to be a partnership. Okay, thank you guys. Thanks for so much for showing up in there in the chat. Thank you, Rachel, even with the questionable audio that we have for this week. We'll wrap it up and we'll see you all again next week.